singing for our lives. We are a justice-seeking people, and we are singing for our lives. We are young and old together, and we are singing for our lives. We are young and old together, and we are singing for our lives. We are a land of many colors, and we are singing for our lives. We are a land of many colors, and we are singing for our lives.
And now it's time for a story. This morning's story comes to us from the Talmud. The great sage, Rabbi Akiva, was traveling and came to stop at a city. There he looked for a place to spend the night, but he could find no one to offer him hospitality. He said to himself, all that God does for the good. And so he went to sleep in a field. He had with him as he traveled a rooster, a donkey, and a candle. During the night, a fierce wind blew and snuffed out his candle. A cat crept up and snatched the rooster. Then a lion approached and ate the donkey. Rabbi Akiva was not disheartened. He said to himself, all that God does for the good. In the morning, he awoke to find out that invaders had come and captured all the residents of the city. Rabbi Akiva was saved because he had camped outside the city, and neither the bright candle nor the noisy rooster and donkey were there to attract any attention to him. All that God does, he said, God does for the good. You might be wondering why we tell this story today. Well, it's not to say that every bad thing that happens to us is just actually some hidden good. Some things are just bad. But it is to say that we don't always know the whole story. In fact, sometimes we never know the whole story. Sometimes there are forces at work we don't quite understand, and we can have hope even in the midst of the bad stuff, because we know that it might not be the whole story or the end of the story. And now, on the vernal equinox, it's time to turn the wheel of our seasons as we celebrate the beginning of autumn, along with the beginning of the Jewish New Year. Pat's going to turn the wheel for us. And now it is time in our service to lift up all those feelings that lay deep in our hearts. We are a community that holds one another in our joys and in our pain. So if you have joys or sorrows to share this morning, I invite you to use the chat box in our Zoom worship to share your joys and sorrows with all of us, and to know that whatever you have on your heart this morning, we are with you. This morning, we hold in our hearts school children and their grown-ups in our community, those who delight in autumn, Johann Sebastian Bach, Scobie's miraculous Risk, Dylan and his worried stomach and his little brother, Kevin and his mother, Bob's patients, Mateo and his great-grandma, Gigi's class, and all those joys and sorrows that stay silent deep within our hearts. We know that we are with one another in this. And now is the time in our service for the spiritual practice of generosity. We ask if you're able to give this morning to our church community, and we want you to know that we share a quarter of our gifts from our services with a monthly service partner. This month's service partner is the Rochester Committee on Latin America. And in the chat, you will find a link to donate online or an address to mail a check if you're able. In both cases, you can note that your gift is meant for this morning's service, and that way a quarter of it will be shared with our partner. And we thank you for your generosity. We are always grateful. And now let us come into a time of centering and shared silence. Get comfortable in your chair. Take a deep breath. Let your shoulders relax. Maybe your feet find the floor. And let us close our eyes. Let us close our eyes and imagine. Let us close our eyes and imagine a world that is real and not yet real. A world where we do not go to sleep afraid of what new horror might await us when we wake each morning. A world where we each have all that we need to survive in it. A world where survival is not the only measure of success, but where we have the space to consider delight, abundance, liberation. A world where our grandchildren's grandchildren are held in the gentle embrace of community. A world where the only fires burning are the candles lit in reverence, the hearth fires of warm welcome, the bright beacons of justice. Let us close our eyes and imagine such a world. Let us weave it into song and shape it into story until it comes to life.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in
One of the ways I most infuriate my spouse is by saying, whenever he gets to ranting about why people support some right-wing scheme or other when it's obviously based in falsehood or inaccuracy or bad science. Babe, facts don't matter. Facts don't matter. It drives him mad, hammering home the point in really the most obnoxious way that what goes on inside us matters so much more to us than facts. Today, with what should be all the known facts in the universe literally at our fingertips, maybe you've noticed that this seems more true than ever. Facts don't matter. Though surely you don't annoy your spouse by repeating it. Perhaps you're even beginning to sympathize with my beleaguered spouse as I annoy you by its repetition. Sorry, facts don't matter. Okay, let me stop and be clear for a minute. Of course, facts matter. The truth matters, and obfuscation of the truth for nefarious ends is wrong. Fact, hard evidence, is not inherently valueless, not at all. It's just that, as much as we would like to believe otherwise, facts don't matter a whole lot to us. Not really. Not in our everyday decision making. Most of our choices, whether we think that they are or not, are made from our guts and not from our intellect. Our brains are not built for pure logic, unadulterated, fact-based behavior, if such a thing as an unadulterated fact could ever be known. We see evidence of this phenomenon splattered across our lives, especially right now. My child's preschool spent months trying to decide on a safety plan for reopening this fall. If you've been in on one of those meetings, you know exactly how exhausting this was. Because we have some facts about pandemic safety, and our possession of some of the facts made us feel like we needed to be doing fact-based work. Spoiler, we weren't. We were doing feelings-based work. We needed a plan to keep people factually safe as much as a thing can exist. Double spoiler, it cannot. But primarily, we needed a plan to make people feel safe, because feelings matter. Even those of us who think of ourselves as perfectly reasonable with a capital R cannot stop our feelings from guiding our choices. My mother, who had a long career in public health, loves to repeat the public health policy maxim that guided her work over the dinner table discussions with frequency. Knowledge alone, she'll say, does not change behavior. We, as a public, had scientific data showing the harmful effects of smoking, for example, for decades before we saw a significant decrease in the number of people who smoke. And even then, it was only after we made it very difficult with policy to buy cigarettes, steal cigarettes, to use them in public places. A generation of information campaigns did not change our behavior. Facts didn't matter to us the way feelings did. Now, ironically, here's some science. Cognitive behavioral research tells us that people regularly dismiss evidence and fact that calls their dearly held beliefs into question. People convince themselves they utilize data to make choices, but in reality, they cannot help but make decisions based on interpretation of data through the lens of their cultural worldview and their deepest feelings. Listen to this quote from Elizabeth Colbert, summarizing a study by Stanford behavioral scientists. Researchers rounded up a group of students who had opposing opinions about capital punishment. Half the students were in favor of it and thought that it deterred crime. The other half were against it and thought it had no effect on crime. The students were asked to respond to two studies. One provided data in support of the deterrence argument. The other provided data that called it into question. Both studies, you guessed it, were made up and had been designed to present what were, objectively speaking, equally compelling statistics. The students who had originally supported capital punishment rated the pro-deterrence data highly credible and the anti-deterrence data unconvincing. The students who'd originally opposed capital punishment did the reverse. At the end of the experiment, the students were asked once again about their views. Those who'd started out pro-capital punishment were now even more in favor of it. Those who'd opposed it were even more hostile. Friends, facts don't matter to us. Not a whole lot. Here's another example. I vaccinate my children. I believe this to be a fact-based, research-based decision. In reality, I have not researched vaccination in general or the specific vaccines that they're given because I am not a microbiologist. I haven't even read the medical journal articles that actual microbiologists have published on the efficacy of vaccines. What I have done is trusted my doctor to have read and understood them. I've trusted the Centers for Disease Control on their health recommendations, presuming them to have read and understood the science. I have trusted the FDA on its supervision of vaccine trials. It's still the right decision, but you see how it isn't fact-based, it's trust-based. We on the left tend to lose our minds a bit over facts, over agreement on an objective truth. And I promise you, I also get incensed over climate collapse denials and revisionist history and targeted social media conspiracy theories and the outright malicious lying that characterizes our political landscape. But shouting facts into the void will not win us the war of truth. Because once again, facts don't matter, babe. Facts don't matter to our political opponents. Facts don't matter to us, not in the way we think they do. Not a holistic, objective view of all the facts at hand. And here's why that's a little bit okay. Our fact-based feelings of superiority are not actually factual. Thinking ourselves to be right doesn't make us righteous. Here's a fact about the scope of the universe. Maybe I read it on the internet. I most certainly did not do the math to determine it myself, so you'll believe me or not based on your trust in my discernment of internet sources. Here's how many stars there are in the cosmos. If we recruited 80 million people, 80 million tireless souls, to each count a star a second, that's 80 million stars every second, how long do we think it would take to count every star that exists? By astrophysicists' best guess, it would take 28 million years. 28 million years counting 80 million stars a second to number the cosmos. So maybe, just maybe, we don't know everything. Maybe we know almost nothing. The scope of this universe is unfathomably large. The scope of all we do not know is unfathomably large. So maybe something other than facts ought to be our primary lens of understanding anyhow. Maybe ours is a universe that requires not fact, but imagination for any kind of truth to emerge for us. Friends, in a cosmos so vast, certainty becomes the death of spirituality. Certainty becomes the death of relationship. There does exist a place of connection that is beyond fact. We can meet one another in a space of story and imagination that reveals truths more solid than fact. Facts may not matter or matter much to us, but we can still tell stories that are true. Better yet, stories that are truer than true. When I was in seminary, I had an assignment to write an answer to these questions on the story of Exodus. Who escaped Egypt? When and by what route? I dove deep into research. There are many theories about a mistranslation of the Hebrew and a route across the Reed Sea, a shallow, marshy area, rather than the Red Sea. Theories about overestimation in the text of the number of liberated slaves. Theories about the date. Theories that make way for factual plausibility. But Exodus is not a history, and it never meant to be. It's not a news article. It's not an official record. In fact, empires are pretty excellent record keepers, and there is nary a shred of evidence that the story of this mass slave exodus was ever factual. It is just that, a story written for people who were currently enslaved by an evil empire. A story written for people whose liberation seemed impossible. And any attempts to make this story factually plausible rob it of its truth and its power. Because it is a story about what is truer than true. It is a story that gives enslaved people the gift of imagining an impossible liberation into being. We don't demand justice because objective fact and reason make it the most logical course of action. We demand justice because we can imagine a better world than this one. This story, along with all our truest stories, has led its readers, oppressed people of every age, to imagine that an impossibly powerful force of justice works in this world. To imagine that what seems impossible is plausible. And who are we? We who know so little for certain. Who are we to say that isn't a fact? May it be true. May it be truer than true. have her as a benediction, these words from Harry Potter. "Tell me one last thing," said Harry. "Is this real, or has this been happening inside my head?" "Of course it is happening inside your head, Harry, but why on earth should that mean it is not real?" Amen. And let us sing together our closing hymn, "A Fire, Mist, and a Planet."
A fire, mist, and planet, a crystal and a cell, a starfish and a saurian, and caves where ancients dwelled. The sense of law and beauty, a face turned from the sod. Some call it evolution, and others call it God. Haze on the far horizon, the infinite tender sky, the ripe rich tints of cornfields and wild geese sailing high and over high and lowland, the charm of goldenrod. Some people call it autumn, and others call it God. Like tides on crescent beaches, when moons so new and thin, into our hearts high yearnings come welling, surging in, come from the mystic ocean, whose rim no foot has trod. Some people call it longing, and others call it God. A century lone and frozen, a mother's scarf for her brood, and Socrates' dread hemlock, and Jesus on the rood, and millions who, though nameless, the straight hard pathway trod. Some call it consecration, and others call it God.
Let us extinguish our chalices together as we recite our chalice extinguishing words. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.